The storm hit the Colorado Rockies without warning on that October evening in 1878, and Sarah Mitchell knew she was going to die before she found help. Her horse had thrown her 3 miles back when lightning split a pine tree, and she had been walking ever since, each step heavier than the last as fever burned through her body like wildfire. The illness had started 2 days ago in Denver, a simple cough that rapidly became something far more sinister. The doctor there had given her laudanum and told her to rest, but she could not rest, not when her younger brother lay injured in a mining camp near Leadville, not when she was the only family he had left in this world. So she had purchased a horse with the last of her money, ignored the warnings about the mountain passes, and set out alone. Now she was paying for that foolishness with every labored breath. The rain came down in sheets, soaking through her already damp traveling dress and making her shiver despite the heat of the fever. Her vision blurred at the edges, and she stumbled over a root she should have seen, catching herself against a boulder. The rough stones scraped her palms, but she barely felt it. Everything felt distant now, as if she were watching herself from somewhere far away. Sarah forced herself to keep moving. The alternative was to lie down in the mud and let the mountain take her, and she had not come this far to surrender. Somewhere ahead there had to be shelter. A mining shack, a trapper's cabin, anything with a roof and 4 walls. The trees pressed close on either side of the narrow trail, their branches creaking in the wind. Thunder rolled across the peaks, and Sarah flinched, remembering the lightning that had spooked her horse. Her legs trembled with exhaustion, and she knew she could not go much farther. The fever was winning, pulling her down into darkness with every step. Then, through the rain and gathering dusk, she saw it. A light, warm and golden, flickering like a beacon in the wilderness. Sarah tried to call out, but her voice came as barely a whisper. She pushed forward, fixing her eyes on that light, afraid it might vanish if she looked away. The path seemed to stretch endlessly, but she kept walking, kept moving, kept breathing. The light grew brighter, and she could make out the shape of a cabin now, solid and real, with smoke rising from its chimney despite the rain. It was larger than most mountain shelters, built from thick logs that looked like they could withstand anything nature threw at them. A covered porch wrapped around the front, and she could see stacks of firewood under the eaves, neatly split and organized. Sarah's legs gave out at the bottom of the porch steps. She tried to catch herself, but her body would not respond, and she collapsed onto the wooden stairs with a jarring thud that sent pain shooting through her hip. She lay there, rain pounding against her back, and managed to lift one shaking hand to knock against the lowest step. The sound was pathetically weak, lost in the storm. She tried again, scraping her knuckles against the wood, and this time she found her voice. "Please," she whispered, "please help me." The cabin door swung open with such speed that Sarah knew whoever was inside must have heard something. Warm light spilled out onto the porch, and a shadow filled the doorway, massive and broad-shouldered. "What in God's name?" The voice was deep, rough with surprise. Heavy boots thundered down the steps, and then strong hands were sliding under her shoulders and knees, lifting her as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. Sarah's head lolled against something solid, and she had a confused impression of tremendous strength before the world tilted and she was being carried up the steps. The warmth of the cabin hit her like a physical thing, and she shivered violently as the contrast with the cold rain registered. She was being laid down on something soft, a bed or a sofa, and then those capable hands were pulling the wet cloak away from her shoulders. "Miss, can you hear me? Can you tell me your name?" Sarah forced her eyes to focus. The man leaning over her was perhaps the largest human being she had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to fill her entire field of vision. His arms were thick with muscle, visible even through the rolled-up sleeves of his flannel shirt, and his chest was broad and powerful. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, pulled back from a face that was all hard angles and sharp lines, weathered by sun and wind. A thick beard covered his jaw, and his eyes, she saw, were a startling pale blue, intense and focused entirely on her. "Sarah," she managed, "Sarah Mitchell. I am Caleb Stone. You are safe now." His hands moved to her forehead, and she felt the calluses on his palm, rough but gentle. "Christ, you are burning up. How long have you been sick?" 2 days, maybe 3. I do not know anymore." The words came slowly, her tongue thick in her mouth. "My horse. I lost my horse." "Do not worry about the horse now. We need to get you warm and dry, get this fever down. Caleb moved away, and Sarah heard him crossing the cabin with quick, purposeful strides. She turned her head, trying to take in her surroundings. The cabin was a single large room, dominated by a stone fireplace where a substantial fire burned. The furniture was all handmade but well-crafted, solid and functional. Furs covered the floor and the bed where she lay, and dried herbs hung from the rafters, filling the air with a pleasant earthy scent. Shelves lined one wall, stocked with provisions and equipment, and she could see a workbench in one corner, covered with tools and what looked like traps in various stages of repair. Caleb returned with an armload of supplies, blankets, a basin of water, strips of cloth. He set them down on the small table beside the bed, and then straightened, looking down at her with those piercing blue eyes. "Your clothes are soaked through. They need to come off, or you will never get warm." He said it matter-of-factly, without any hint of impropriety, but Sarah felt her face heat anyway. "I can manage," she said, though she was not at all sure that was true. Caleb studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I will turn my back and tend the fire. Call out if you need help." He was as good as his word, turning away and striding to the fireplace, where he began adding wood to the already substantial blaze. Sarah struggled to sit up, her arms shaking with the effort. Her fingers fumbled with the buttons of her dress, clumsy and uncoordinated. The simple task felt insurmountable, and after managing only 3 buttons, she had to stop and rest, panting with exertion. "I cannot do it," she admitted, hating the weakness in her voice. "I'm sorry, I cannot." Caleb turned back, and there was no judgment in his expression, only concern. "No need to apologize. You're very ill." He crossed back to the bed and knelt beside it, bringing his face level with hers. "I'm going to help you now. I will be as quick and respectful as I can, but getting you dry is more important than modesty right now. Do you understand?" Sarah nodded, too exhausted to protest even if she had wanted to. Caleb's hands moved to the buttons of her dress, and despite his size, his fingers worked with surprising dexterity, unfastening each one with efficient care. He eased the wet fabric away from her shoulders, keeping his eyes fixed on his task rather than her, and Sarah was grateful for that small courtesy. Within minutes, he had stripped away the sodden layers of her dress, petticoats, and chemise, wrapping her immediately in a thick, warm blanket that smelled of pine and wood smoke. The relief was immediate, and Sarah sighed, some of the tension leaving her body. "Better?" Caleb asked. "Yes, thank you." He nodded and dipped one of the cloths into the basin of water. "I'm going to try to cool the fever. This might feel uncomfortable at first." The cloth touched her forehead, and Sarah gasped at the shock of it, but Caleb's other hand came to rest on her shoulder, steadying her. "I know. Just breathe through it." He worked methodically, wiping the cool cloth across her forehead, her temples, behind her ears, along the sides of her neck. His touch was surprisingly gentle for such a large man, and Sarah found herself relaxing into it, her eyes drifting closed. "How did you end up out in this storm?" Caleb asked as he worked, his deep voice a soothing rumble. "This is not country for lone travelers, especially not with a fever." "My brother," Sarah murmured. "He was hurt in a mining accident near Leadville. I am the only family he has. I had to get to him." Caleb's hand paused for just a moment before resuming its steady motion. "You came from Denver?" "Yes." "That's more than 100 miles through mountain passes, on your own." There was something in his voice that might have been admiration or might have been disbelief. "I made it most of the way before I got sick. Or maybe I was already sick and just did not notice." Sarah forced her eyes open, looking up at him. "He needs me. I have to get to Leadville." "You are not going anywhere until this fever breaks," Caleb said firmly. "Even if I were willing to let you try, which I am not, you would not make it a mile in this condition. But Thomas, your brother will have to wait a few days. Better he waits than you kill yourself trying to reach him." Caleb rinsed the cloth in the basin and returned it to her forehead. "Right now you need rest, medicine, and food if you can keep it down." Sarah wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. She could barely sit up, let alone travel another 20 miles through the mountains. "I do not want to impose on you. You were not expecting company." "No, I was not," Caleb agreed. "But that does not mean you are not welcome. This mountain can be deadly to those who do not know her moods. You did the right thing, seeking shelter." I saw your light through the trees. I thought I might be hallucinating. The light is real enough. I always keep a lamp burning in the window when storms come through, just in case someone needs to find their way here." He set the cloth aside and reached for a small bottle on the shelf above the bed. "I have some willow bark tincture. It will help with the fever and the aching. Can you swallow?" "I think so." Caleb poured a measure of dark liquid into a tin cup and added water from a pitcher. He slid one large hand behind her shoulders, supporting her as he raised the cup to her lips. Slowly now, just small sips. The tincture was bitter, but Sarah drank it dutifully, trusting that this stranger knew what he was doing. When the cup was empty, Caleb lowered her back onto the pillows, tucking the blanket more securely around her. "Sleep if you can," he said. "I will be right here if you need anything." "Thank you," Sarah whispered. "I do not know what would have happened if I had not found you." "You found me. That is what matters." Caleb's rough hand brushed a strand of damp hair back from her forehead, the gesture unexpectedly tender. "Rest now, Sarah Mitchell. You're safe here." Sarah let her eyes close, surrendering to the exhaustion that pulled at her. The last thing she was aware of was the sound of Caleb moving around the cabin, his footsteps solid and reassuring, and the crackling of the fire that kept the mountain cold at bay. When Sarah woke, she had no idea how much time had passed. The cabin was dimmer than before, lit only by the glow of the fireplace and a single oil lamp on the table. Her head throbbed, and her mouth felt like it was stuffed with cotton, but the crushing weight of the fever seemed slightly less oppressive. She turned her head and saw Caleb sitting in a chair beside the bed, his body angled so he could watch both her and the fire. He held a piece of wood in his hands and was carving it with a knife, the movements practiced and sure. Curls of wood shavings fell to the floor around his boots. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, and a flicker of relief crossed his features. "You are awake. How do you feel?" "Like I was trampled by a horse," Sarah admitted, "but better than before, I think." "That's progress." Caleb set aside his carving and reached for the water pitcher. "You need to drink. Fever dehydrates the body." He helped her sit up, propping pillows behind her back, and handed her a cup of cool water. Sarah drank gratefully, not realizing how thirsty she was until the first swallow. She drained the cup and accepted a second one, sipping it more slowly. "What time is it?" she asked. "Past midnight." "You've been sleeping for about 6 hours." Caleb settled back into his chair, watching her with those intense blue eyes. "The fever broke once, but it will probably come back. These things tend to happen in waves." "You have done this before? Taken care of sick people?" "I have lived in these mountains for 8 years. You learn how to treat common ailments, or you do not survive long." He gestured to the shelves lined with jars and bottles. "I know which plants help with fever, which ones ease pain, which ones fight infection. A man alone has to be his own doctor." "Why do you live alone?" The question came out before Sarah could stop it, and she immediately wished she could take it back. "I am sorry. That was rude. You do not have to answer." But Caleb did not seem offended. "I came to the mountains after the war. I needed space, quiet, a place where I could think without people crowding around me." His gaze shifted to the fire, and something dark passed over his face. "I did things during the war that I am not proud of. Things that made it hard to be around others afterward. The mountains do not judge. They do not care what you have done, only what you do now." Sarah heard the pain beneath his words, the weight of old wounds that had never fully healed. "The war was hard on everyone," she said softly. "My father fought for the Union. He came home different from the man who left. He died 2 years after Appomattox, but I think part of him died long before that, somewhere on a battlefield whose name we never learned." Caleb's eyes swung back to her, and there was understanding there, the recognition of shared grief. "I'm sorry for your loss. And I'm sorry for whatever you carry." They sat in silence for a moment, the crackle of the fire the only sound. Then Caleb stirred, reaching for a pot that sat warming at the edge of the hearth. "You should eat something if you can. I made broth earlier. It is simple but nourishing." The smell of the broth made Sarah's stomach clench, and she was not sure if it was from hunger or nausea. "I will try." Caleb ladled the broth into a bowl and brought it to her, along with a spoon. Sarah's hands shook as she took them, and on her first attempt to lift the spoon to her mouth, she spilled more than she delivered. Without a word, Caleb took the spoon from her hand. "Let me." Sarah felt her cheeks heat with embarrassment. "I am not a child? No, you are a woman weakened by fever. There's no shame in accepting help when you need it." He dipped the spoon into the broth and raised it to her lips, waiting patiently. Sarah opened her mouth and let him feed her, feeling oddly vulnerable, but also cared for in a way she had not experienced since her mother died. Caleb was patient, never rushing her, pausing when she needed to rest between spoonfuls. The broth was rich and savory, flavored with herbs and what tasted like venison, and it settled warmly in her stomach. "That is enough for now," she said, after perhaps half the bowl was gone. "Thank you." "You did well." Caleb set the bowl aside and handed her more water. "Try to sleep again. Your body needs rest to fight the sickness." "Will you tell me about yourself?" Sarah asked, not ready to return to sleep yet. "If you do not mind, I would like to know more about the man who saved my life." Caleb leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. "There's not much to tell. I am just a man who lives in the mountains." "I do not believe that. No one is just anything." A slight smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, barely visible through his beard. "Persistent, are you not? My mother always said it was my most irritating quality. I suspect she also found it endearing." Caleb was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "I grew up in Missouri on a farm. I was the oldest of 5 children. When the war came, I joined up with the Union Army. I was 18 and full of idealism, convinced I was fighting for something righteous and pure." His voice took on a bitter edge. 4 years later, I came home with scars on my body and worse ones on my soul. My family tried to help, but I could not settle back into farm life. Everything felt too small, too confining. So I headed west, drifting from one place to another until I ended up here in the Rockies. I built this cabin with my own hands, and I have been here ever since. Do you ever see your family? I write to my mother twice a year, and she writes back. She understands why I cannot come home, even if it hurts her. He met Sarah's eyes. "What about you? What is your story?" Sarah pulled the blanket more tightly around herself. "I grew up in St. Louis. My father was a school teacher before the war, and my mother took in sewing. We were not wealthy, but we were happy. After father died, mother got sick, consumption. She held on for almost a year, but in the end, the disease took her too. That left just Thomas and me. He is 6 years younger than I am, and he has always been restless, always looking for adventure. When he heard about the silver strikes in Colorado, nothing I said could convince him not to go. He left St. Louis last year and ended up in Leadville." "And you followed him to Denver?" "I came west 3 months ago. I found work as a seamstress, and I was saving money to bring Thomas back to civilization before he got himself killed in a mining accident." Her voice cracked. "I was too late. A tunnel collapsed 2 weeks ago. He survived, but he broke his leg badly, and the letter I received said he was not healing well. I had to come." "You are a good sister," Caleb said quietly. "I'm all he has." "And who do you have, Sarah Mitchell?" The question struck her unexpectedly, and she felt tears prick her eyes. "I have Thomas. That's enough." "Is it?" Caleb's gaze was steady, seeing more than she wanted to reveal. Sarah looked away, focusing on the patterns the firelight made on the log walls. "It has to be." Caleb reached out and took her hand, his palm warm and rough against her skin. "Everyone needs someone to take care of them sometimes, even strong, persistent women who cross mountains during storms to save their brothers." Sarah's throat tightened, and she squeezed his hand, grateful for the comfort of human touch. "Thank you for taking care of me." "It is my honor." He released her hand slowly, as if reluctant to break the connection. "Now, sleep. Morning will be here before you know it." This time, when Sarah closed her eyes, she felt safer than she had in longer than she could remember. The mountain man sitting guard beside her bed was a stranger, but somehow he already felt like more than that. Like someone who understood the parts of herself she usually kept hidden. She drifted off with the sound of his breathing mingling with the crackle of the fire, a lullaby that carried her into dreamless sleep. The fever came back in the darkest hours of the night, just as Caleb had predicted. Sarah woke shivering and burning at the same time, her skin slick with sweat despite the cold that seemed to penetrate her bones. She heard herself whimpering and hated the sound, but she could not stop it. "I am here." Caleb's voice came out of the darkness, and then his hands were on her, checking her forehead, her pulse. "The fever is high again. Hold on, Sarah. Just hold on." He moved with swift efficiency, stripping away the sweat-soaked blankets and replacing them with fresh ones, sponging her down with cool water despite her protests. When she started shaking so badly her teeth chattered, he wrapped her in furs and pulled her against his chest, sharing his body heat. Sarah knew she should protest, should care about propriety, but all she could focus on was the solid warmth of him, the way his arms encircled her completely, making her feel protected and safe. His heart beat steady and strong beneath her ear, and she focused on that rhythm, using it as an anchor when the fever tried to pull her under. "That is it," Caleb murmured, one hand stroking her hair. "Stay with me, Sarah. Do not let go." "I'm trying," she whispered. "I know you are. You are strong. I can feel it." "I do not feel strong. The strongest people rarely do. They just keep going anyway." Sarah pressed closer to him, and his arms tightened around her. She had never been held like this before, never felt this strange combination of vulnerability and safety. Caleb was essentially a stranger, yet here she was, wrapped in his embrace, trusting him with her life. "Tell me about the mountains," she said, needing the distraction of his voice. "Tell me what you love about them." Caleb was quiet for a moment, and she felt his chest rise and fall with breath. "I love how honest they are. The mountain will kill you if you are careless, but it does so without malice. It is simply nature following its laws. There is something clean about that, something pure. I love the silence, the way you can hear your own thoughts without the noise of the world drowning them out. I love the sunrise, when the first light hits the peaks and turns them gold. I love the wildlife, the elk and the deer, the eagles and the hawks. I love knowing that I built a life here with my own hands, that everything I have, I earned." It sounds lonely. It is. Sometimes unbearably so. His hand continued its soothing motion through her hair. But loneliness felt safer than trying to connect with people who could not understand what I had seen, what I had done. Out here, I do not have to explain myself. "You do not have to explain yourself to me either," Sarah said. "Whatever you did during the war, whoever you were then, I see who you are now. And the man you are now is kind and gentle and good." Caleb's arms tightened around her almost convulsively, and she heard him draw in a sharp breath. "You do not know me, Sarah. I know you saved my life. I know you are taking care of me when you could have turned me away. I know your hands are gentle despite your strength." She tilted her head back to look up at him, though she could barely make out his features in the darkness. "I know I trust you, even though we only just met. Sometimes you know a person's character in a moment better than you learn it in years." "You should rest," Caleb said, his voice rough. "Save your strength." But Sarah could feel the way his heart had started racing, could sense that her words had affected him deeply. She settled back against his chest, content for now to simply be held, to feel the rise and fall of his breathing and the warmth of his body chasing away the chills. "Caleb?" she whispered. "Yes? I'm glad I found you, even with the fever, even with everything. I am glad it was your door I came to." His hand came to rest on her head, cupping it gently. "Sleep now, Sarah. I will watch over you." And she believed him. Morning came gradually, the darkness giving way to gray light that filtered through the cabin's single window. Sarah woke to find herself still tucked against Caleb's side, his arm draped protectively across her. The fever had broken again, and while she still felt weak and shaky, the crushing weight of it had lifted. Caleb stirred when she shifted, his eyes opening immediately, alert and aware. "How do you feel?" "Better, clearer." Sarah reluctantly pulled away from his warmth, suddenly aware of how intimately they had spent the night. "I'm sorry. I did not mean to keep you from your bed. I have slept in worse places. A chair by the fire is hardly a hardship." He stood and stretched, and Sarah could not help but watch the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt, the sheer power evident in every line of his body. He caught her looking and raised an eyebrow, and she felt her face heat. "Thank you," she said quickly, "for last night. For everything. You needed help. I was here to give it." He moved to the fireplace and began building up the fire, his movements economical and practiced. "Are you hungry? I can make breakfast." As if in answer, Sarah's stomach growled audibly, and Caleb chuckled, the sound warm and rich. "I will take that as a yes." Sarah watched as he moved around the cabin, gathering ingredients and implements. Despite his size, he moved with surprising grace, clearly comfortable in his space. He mixed up Johnny cakes and set them to cook on a griddle, then sliced venison from a haunch hanging in the corner, the meat cured and ready to eat. "Do you hunt all your own food?" Sarah asked. "Most of it. I trap furs to sell in town twice a year, and I use that money to buy supplies I cannot make myself: flour, sugar, coffee, ammunition. But yes, most of what I eat comes from the mountain." He flipped the Johnny cakes with practiced ease. "It is a good life, if a simple one." "I think simple sounds wonderful right now. My life has felt complicated for so long." Caleb glanced at her over his shoulder. "Tell me about your life in Denver. What did you do there besides work as a seamstress?" "There was not much besides work, honestly. I rented a small room in a boarding house. I sewed from dawn until dark most days, trying to save money. On Sundays, I would go to church and then write letters to Thomas, telling him to be careful, to come back to civilization." She smiled sadly. He never listened. Brothers rarely do. Caleb slid the Johnny cakes and meat onto 2 plates and brought one to her. "Careful, the plate is hot." The food smelled delicious and Sarah ate slowly, savoring each bite. The Johnny cakes were fluffy and slightly sweet, and the venison was tender and flavorful. "You are a good cook." "I have had a lot of practice. When your options are cook well or eat poorly, you learn fast." He sat in the chair beside the bed with his own plate. "Do you plan to stay in Colorado after you retrieve your brother?" Sarah considered the question. "I've not thought that far ahead. I suppose we will go back to St. Louis, try to build a life there again." "Is that what you want?" "I want Thomas to be safe. Everything else is secondary." Caleb studied her for a long moment. "What would you do if you could do anything? If you did not have to worry about your brother or money or what anyone else thought?" The question surprised her. No one had ever asked her what she wanted before. It was always assumed that she would do her duty, take care of her family, put everyone else's needs before her own. "I do not know," she said slowly. "I've never had the luxury of thinking about it. Think about it now." Sarah set her plate aside, the food sitting warmly in her stomach. What did she want? The question felt dangerous, like opening a door she had kept locked for years. "I suppose I would like a home, a real home, not just a room in a boarding house or a cramped apartment, somewhere with light and space, somewhere I could put down roots. I would like to wake up without worrying about how I will pay rent or whether I will have enough work. I would like to make beautiful things, not just functional clothes, but dresses that make women feel special. And I would like—" She stopped, suddenly embarrassed. "What?" Caleb prompted gently. "I would like someone to share it with. I'm tired of being alone, of being strong all the time, of having no one to lean on when things get hard." She met his eyes. "I know that makes me sound weak. It makes you sound human." He reached out and took her hand. "There is no shame in wanting companionship, Sarah. We are not meant to walk through this life entirely alone. Yet you do. I have. That does not mean I do not understand the cost." His thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand. "Maybe I have been alone so long I forgot what it felt like to want anything else. Until last night." Sarah's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "I mean holding you through the fever, taking care of you. It reminded me what it feels like to have a purpose beyond simple survival. It reminded me that connection with another person can be worth the risk of being hurt." He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "You walked into my cabin sick and desperate, and somehow in one night you made me feel more alive than I have in 8 years. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "Caleb, you do not have to say anything. I know you have to go to your brother. I know you have a life waiting for you somewhere else. I just wanted you to know that meeting you has meant something to me, more than I have words to express." Sarah squeezed his hand, her heart aching with emotions she could not name. "It has meant something to me too. You have been so kind, so gentle. You made me feel safe when I did not know if I would survive the night." They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped, the connection between them almost tangible. Then Caleb cleared his throat and stood, releasing her hand. You should rest more today. Build up your strength. The fever may come back again, and even if it does not, you are still weak. Will you sit with me? Sarah asked. Tell me more about your life here? If you wish. Caleb settled back into his chair and began to talk, his deep voice filling the cabin with stories of his years in the mountains. He told her about the first winter, when he had nearly starved because he had not prepared enough provisions. He told her about tracking a wounded grizzly bear for 3 days to put it out of its misery. He told her about the satisfaction of building the cabin with his own hands, of fitting each log into place and watching his home take shape. Sarah listened, fascinated by this glimpse into a life so different from her own. Caleb's existence was harsh and demanding, but there was also a simplicity to it that appealed to her. He answered to no one but himself and nature. He worked hard, but the fruits of his labor were his alone. He lived by his own code, made his own rules. Do you ever think about leaving the mountains? She asked. Sometimes. Usually in the middle of winter when the snow is so deep I cannot leave the cabin for weeks at a time, and the silence feels more like a prison than a sanctuary. He leaned back, looking at the rough-hewn rafters above them. But then spring comes, and the ice melts, and everything turns green again, and I remember why I'm here. Because you are running from something. Caleb's gaze swung back to her, sharp and assessing. Yes. What if you stopped running? What if you faced whatever it is and found you could survive it? I am not sure I could. I think you are stronger than you know. Sarah pushed herself up to sitting, ignoring the slight dizziness the movement caused. You talk about the war like it broke you, but Caleb, broken men do not build cabins in the wilderness. Broken men do not carve beautiful things from wood, or take in sick strangers, or hold them through the night when fever takes hold. Whatever you did, whatever you think you are, I see a good man when I look at you, a strong man, a man capable of great gentleness and great courage. Caleb stared at her, and Sarah saw something raw and vulnerable in his expression, something that made her chest ache. You see what you want to see. I see what is there. She reached out, and after a moment he took her hand again. I see you, Caleb Stone. His fingers tightened around hers almost painfully, and she saw him swallow hard. How can you be so certain? You have known me less than a day. Sometimes a day is enough. Sometimes a moment is enough. Sarah drew his hand to her chest, pressing it over her heart. I do not know what the future holds. I do not know what will happen after I leave here. But I know that right now, in this moment, you are exactly who I needed you to be. And that matters. Caleb leaned forward, his free hand coming up to cup her face with infinite gentleness. You are an extraordinary woman, Sarah Mitchell. I'm just a seamstress from St. Louis. No, you're so much more than that. His thumb stroked along her cheekbone. You are fierce and brave and compassionate. You crossed 100 miles of wilderness alone to save your brother. You kept going even when sickness tried to take you down. You looked at a scarred mountain man and saw someone worth knowing. That takes a rare kind of courage. Sarah felt like she could not breathe, but not from the fever this time. The way Caleb was looking at her made her feel seen in a way she had never experienced before, not as a sister or a seamstress or a burden, but as a woman, as someone valuable in her own right. Caleb, she whispered, not even sure what she wanted to say. He seemed to understand anyway. His hand slid into her hair, cradling the back of her head, and he drew her forward until their foreheads touched. Tell me to stop, he murmured. Tell me this is wrong, that you do not want this, and I will let you go right now. But Sarah did not want him to stop. She wanted this more than she could remember wanting anything. Do not stop. Caleb's lips met hers in a kiss that was everything his hands had promised, gentle yet firm, tender yet passionate. Sarah melted into it, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders, feeling the solid muscle beneath her fingers. He kissed her like she was precious, like she was something to be cherished and protected, and it made her heart swell with emotions she had no name for. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers again. That was probably a mistake. Probably, Sarah agreed, but I do not regret it. Neither do I. He pulled back slightly, his hands still framing her face. But you need to rest, and I should not be taking advantage of you while you are recovering from fever. You're not taking advantage. I wanted that kiss as much as you did. Even so. Caleb stood, putting distance between them with what looked like physical effort. You should lie down, build up your strength. We can talk more later. Sarah wanted to protest, but she could feel exhaustion pulling at her again. The conversation, the emotions, the kiss, all of it had taken a toll on her limited energy. Will you stay close? I'm not going anywhere. Caleb helped her settle back against the pillows and pulled the blankets up around her. Sleep, Sarah. I will be here when you wake. Sarah let her eyes drift closed, but before sleep claimed her, she reached out and caught his hand one more time. Caleb? Yes? Thank you for kissing me. It made me feel like myself again, like someone worth wanting. She felt his lips brush her forehead. You are worth wanting. Never doubt that. Then sleep pulled her under, and she surrendered to it with a smile on her face. The next 2 days passed in a strange, dreamlike progression of sleeping and waking, fever and clarity. Caleb tended her through all of it with unwavering patience, feeding her broth and medicine, changing her blankets when sweat soaked them through, sitting beside her and talking about everything and nothing. Sarah learned that he had taught himself to read Latin from an old book he found in a prospector's abandoned cabin. She learned that he could identify birds by their calls alone, and that he had names for some of the regular animal visitors to his clearing. A doe he called Grace, a raven he called Prophet, a fox he called Clever. She learned that he carved small animals from wood during the long winter nights and sometimes left them on the trail for travelers to find, anonymous gifts from a mountain ghost. In turn, she told him about growing up in St. Louis, about her mother teaching her to sew by candlelight, about her father reading to them from books of poetry. She told him about Thomas as a boy, always getting into trouble, always making her laugh even when she wanted to be angry with him. She told him about the small dreams she had harbored when she was younger, dreams of a dress shop of her own, of creating beauty with her hands. With each conversation, Sarah felt the connection between them deepening, becoming something real and substantial. She caught herself watching him when he did not know she was looking, admiring the way his hands moved with such confidence, the way his body filled space with quiet power. She noticed small things. The way he always made sure she was comfortable before seeing to his own needs, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, the way he sometimes reached out to touch her hand or her hair, as if reassuring himself that she was real. On the evening of the 3rd day, Sarah woke to find Caleb sitting on the edge of the bed, watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "What is it?" she asked, her voice still rough from sleep. "Your fever has been gone for almost 12 hours now. You are recovering." He took her hand. "Which means you will be strong enough to travel soon. 3 or 4 more days, I would guess." The words should have brought relief. She needed to get to Thomas. That had been the whole purpose of this journey. But instead, Sarah felt her heart sink at the thought of leaving this cabin, leaving Caleb. "I suppose I should be happy about that," she said. "Should be." Caleb's thumb traced circles on her palm. "But are you?" Sarah met his eyes, seeing her own confusion and conflict reflected there. "I do not know what I feel. I know I need to get to my brother, but the thought of leaving you makes me feel like I am losing something precious before I have had a chance to understand what it is." "I feel the same," Caleb admitted. "These 3 days with you have been the best I have had in longer than I can remember. The cabin feels different with you in it, more like a home and less like just a shelter." "Then come with me," Sarah said impulsively. "Come to Leadville, help me find Thomas and make sure he is all right. Then we can figure out what this is between us without the pressure of me having to leave." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah could see the war playing out on his face. "Sarah, I have not been around people in 8 years. I do not know if I can handle a mining town, all that noise and crowding. You do not have to stay in the town. You could camp outside and I would come to you. Please, Caleb, I am not ready to say goodbye to you yet." "I am not ready either." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to each knuckle. "All right, I will take you to Leadville and help you find your brother. But Sarah, you need to understand something. I am not good at being around others. I'm rough and unsocialized. I might embarrass you. You could never embarrass me. Sarah sat up, ignoring the slight dizziness, and cupped his bearded face in both hands. You are a good man, Caleb Stone. Anyone who cannot see that is a fool. Caleb turned his head and pressed a kiss to her palm. You have too much faith in me. I have exactly the right amount. Sarah leaned forward and kissed him, pouring all her hope and longing into it. Caleb responded instantly, his arms coming around her and pulling her close. The kiss deepened, becoming more intense, more desperate, as if they were both trying to make up for the lost time they would never have. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. You are making it very hard for me to be honorable. Maybe I do not want you to be honorable right now. Maybe I just want you to hold me. I can do that. Caleb shifted, stretching out on the bed beside her and drawing her into his arms. Sarah snuggled against his chest, her head tucked under his chin, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. Tell me about the war, she said softly. Tell me what haunts you. Caleb's arms tightened around her. Are you certain you want to know? I want to know you. All of you, not just the parts you think are acceptable. He was silent for so long that Sarah thought he might not answer. But then he began to speak, his voice low and rough with old pain. I was part of Sherman's march through Georgia. Do you know what that means? I have heard of it. The burning of Atlanta and the march to the sea. Yes. We burned everything in a path 60 miles wide. Farms, plantations, homes, barns. We destroyed crops and killed livestock. We left nothing that could support the Confederate Army. And I did my part enthusiastically because I believed we were ending the war, saving the Union. He paused and Sarah felt him swallow hard. But it was not just military targets we destroyed. It was people's lives, their homes, their livelihoods. I remember this one farm, a small place with a woman and 3 children. Her husband had died earlier in the war. She begged us not to burn her house, said they would starve without shelter, but we had our orders. I watched her stand there with her children clinging to her skirts, watched her home burn to the ground, and I did nothing to stop it. I could have claimed we had checked it already, could have convinced my unit to move on, but I did not. I let it burn. Sarah held him tighter, feeling the tremor that ran through his powerful body. You were following orders. You were a soldier in a war. That does not absolve me. I made choices, Sarah. Maybe I could not change the overall strategy, but I could have made different choices in those moments. I could have shown more mercy, more compassion. But I was angry and self-righteous, convinced that anyone who supported the Confederacy deserved whatever they got. His voice broke. I was 22 years old, and I had so much blood on my hands, not just from combat, but from cruelty. And when the war ended and I went home, I could not escape what I had done. I saw that woman's face every time I closed my eyes. I still do. Is that why you came to the mountains? I thought if I removed myself from society, if I lived a simple, solitary life, maybe I could atone somehow. Maybe I could find peace. But peace is not something you find by running away. You either make it within yourself, or you do not have it at all. Sarah pulled back enough to look up at him, seeing the anguish in his eyes. You were a soldier in a terrible war. You did things you regret, but Caleb, that does not define who you are now. The man you are now would never watch someone's home burn without trying to help. The man you are now takes in sick strangers and cares for them with gentle hands. The man you are now carves little animals and leaves them for travelers to find. You have changed. You have grown. That has to count for something. Does it? Yes. Sarah kissed him softly. The fact that you carry guilt, that you regret what you did, that proves you have a conscience. Truly cruel men do not feel remorse. They justify their actions and move on, but you could not do that. You felt the weight of what you had done, and it made you want to be better. That is not weakness. That is humanity. Caleb closed his eyes, and Sarah saw a tear slip down his cheek, disappearing into his beard. I do not deserve your kindness. Everyone deserves kindness. Everyone deserves a chance to heal. She wiped away the tear with her thumb. Let me help you the way you helped me. Let me be here for you. You are going to leave in a few days. You have your own life to live. Then we will figure it out together. But for now, right now, let me be here with you. Let me hold you the way you held me." Caleb's control broke, and he buried his face in her hair, his body shaking with silent sobs. Sarah held him through it, her hands stroking his back, whispering words of comfort and acceptance. She had never seen a man cry like this, with such raw, unguarded emotion, and it broke her heart even as it made her love him more. Love. The word crystallized in her mind with startling clarity. She loved him. This mountain man who had saved her life, who had cared for her with such tenderness, who carried wounds that would never fully heal. She loved his strength and his gentleness, his rough exterior, and his soft heart. She loved the way he made her feel seen and valued. She loved him. The realization should have terrified her. They had known each other only 3 days. Love was supposed to take time, grow gradually, build on a foundation of shared experiences and mutual understanding. But sometimes, Sarah thought, love was like lightning, sudden and fierce and undeniable. When Caleb's tears finally subsided, he pulled back, looking embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I should not have—" "Do not apologize," Sarah said firmly. "Not for that. Never for that." He searched her face, and whatever he saw there seemed to reassure him. "You are an extraordinary woman. You have said that before. It bears repeating." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose. "What am I going to do when you leave, Sarah Mitchell? You are going to come with me, remember? We are going to Leadville together. And after that, after we find your brother and make sure he is all right?" Sarah took a deep breath, knowing she was about to take a leap into the unknown. "After that, we figure out if this is real. We figure out if what we feel for each other can survive outside this cabin. We give ourselves a chance." "You would do that? Stay in Colorado? Give up your plans to return to St. Louis?" "I would do that. Because the future I imagined in St. Louis was about safety and familiarity, but it was not about happiness. And you make me happy, Caleb. You make me feel alive." Caleb kissed her then, deep and passionate, a kiss that spoke of promises and possibilities. When they finally broke apart, his eyes were bright with hope. "Then we will try," he said. "We will see where this leads us." "Together," Sarah agreed. "Together." They lay in each other's arms for the rest of the evening, talking and kissing and simply being together. Outside, the mountain grew dark, but inside the cabin, everything was warm and light and full of promise. The next morning, Caleb began preparing for the journey to Leadville. He checked his traps and brought in the pelts, setting aside several of the best ones to trade. He inventoried his supplies and made a list of things he would need to purchase in town. He cleaned his rifle and pistol and sharpened his knives, practical preparations that spoke to the realities of mountain travel. Sarah, feeling stronger each day, helped where she could. She mended a tear in his coat, her seamstress skills coming to use. She organized the herbs on his shelves, learning their names and properties. She cooked a meal from his stores, a stew thick with venison and root vegetables that filled the cabin with savory smells. Working alongside Caleb felt natural, as if they had been doing this for years rather than days. They moved around each other easily, anticipating needs, sharing small smiles and touches. It was domestic and comfortable, and everything Sarah had ever wanted without knowing it. On the 5th day after her arrival, Caleb declared her well enough to travel. "We will take it slow," he said. "Stop often to rest. It is only 20 miles to Leadville, but with your recovery, I want to stretch it over 2 days." "I can manage," Sarah assured him. "I feel almost back to normal. Even so, I would rather be cautious." Caleb packed supplies into 2 large leather packs, distributing the weight carefully. "I will carry most of this. You just focus on keeping your strength up." They set out mid-morning, with Sarah wearing some of Caleb's spare clothes since her own dress had been ruined by the rain and fever. The pants and shirt were far too large, but she belted them and rolled up the sleeves and cuffs, and they were serviceable enough. She felt strange, dressed like a man, but also oddly liberated. The clothes allowed for freedom of movement that petticoats and corsets never had. Caleb led them down the mountain on a trail that Sarah would never have found on her own. It wound through thick forest, over rocky outcroppings, across crystal-clear streams. The autumn air was crisp and clean, scented with pine and earth. Birds called from the branches, and once they saw a herd of elk grazing in a meadow, their heads lifting in unison to watch the humans pass. "It is beautiful," Sarah said, pausing to catch her breath and take in the view. From their vantage point, she could see the mountains rolling away in every direction, peak after peak turning blue in the distance. "This is why I stay," Caleb said, coming to stand beside her. "Moments like this when the world feels clean and new and full of possibility." Sarah leaned against him, and his arm came around her waist, solid and reassuring. "I understand now. Why you love it here. Why you did not want to leave. The mountain is my sanctuary. But Sarah, you're becoming something even more important." He turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. "You are becoming my reason for engaging with the world again. For trying." "I am glad," Sarah said simply, "because you are becoming essential to me too." They made camp that evening in a sheltered spot beside a stream. Caleb built a fire and cooked dinner, while Sarah gathered firewood and prepared their bedrolls. When the meal was ready, they sat close together, watching the flames dance and listening to the water's song. "Tell me about Thomas," Caleb said. "What should I expect when we find him?" Sarah smiled. "He is impulsive and optimistic, always convinced the next big opportunity is just around the corner. He is terrible at planning ahead and even worse at admitting when he is wrong. But he has a good heart, and he loves fiercely. He was devastated when Mother died. I think coming to Colorado was partly about running away from that grief." "We all run from grief in our own ways," Caleb observed. "Yes, we do. The question is whether we eventually stop running and face it, or whether we find something worth stopping for." Caleb took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "I think I have found that something." Sarah's heart swelled. "So have I." That night they lay in their bedrolls close together, not quite touching but near enough that Sarah could feel the warmth radiating from Caleb's body. She stared up at the stars, visible in stunning profusion through the gaps in the trees, and marveled at how much her life had changed in less than a week. She had set out from Denver sick and desperate, with no thought beyond reaching her brother. Now she lay in the wilderness, her body healing, her heart full, falling in love with a mountain man who made her feel things she had never imagined possible. "Caleb," she whispered into the darkness. "Yes?" "I'm afraid." "Of what?" "That this will not last, that we will get to Leadville and reality will intrude, and what we have will not survive it." She heard him shift, and then his hand found hers in the dark, clasping it firmly. "I'm afraid of that too. But Sarah, fear is not a reason to give up before we even try. We have something real here, I know we do, and I believe it is strong enough to survive whatever comes." "You really think so?" "I do, because I have never felt this way about anyone before, and I do not think feelings this powerful come along often. We would be fools to let them slip away without a fight." Sarah squeezed his hand. "Then we will fight for it. Whatever it takes." "Whatever it takes," Caleb echoed. Reassured, Sarah let sleep claim her, her hand still clasped in Caleb's, connected even in dreams. They reached the outskirts of Leadville late the next afternoon. The mining town sprawled across the landscape in a chaotic jumble of wooden buildings, tents, and muddy streets. Even from a distance, Sarah could hear the noise. Hammers striking metal, men shouting, the rumble of wagon wheels over rough roads. Smoke rose from dozens of chimneys and smelters, creating a haze that hung over everything. Caleb stopped at the edge of the tree line, his face set in hard lines. "I had forgotten how loud civilization is." "We do not have to go in together," Sarah said, sensing his discomfort. "You could camp here, and I could go find Thomas and bring him to you." "No, I said I would help you find him, and I will." Caleb's jaw clenched. "I can handle a few hours in town." But Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands had fisted at his sides. "Caleb, it is all right to admit this is hard for you. You have been alone for 8 years. You do not have to force yourself through something that causes you pain just to prove a point." "It is not about proving a point. It is about being there for you." He looked down at her, and his expression softened. "You need to find your brother. I'm not going to send you into that chaos alone. Then we go together. But if it becomes too much, you tell me, and we leave." Agreed. Agreed. They made their way into town, and Sarah felt Caleb growing tenser with every step. The streets were packed with prospectors, merchants, saloon girls, and laborers. Everyone seemed to be in motion, rushing from one place to another with single-minded purpose. The smell was overwhelming. Unwashed bodies, horse manure, coal smoke, and the sulphurous stench of the smelters. Caleb stayed close to Sarah's side, his hand resting on the knife at his belt, his eyes constantly scanning for threats. Sarah realized he was moving through town the same way he probably moved through the wilderness, alert, aware, ready for danger. "Where would your brother be?" Caleb asked, his voice tight. "He was staying at a boarding house on State Street. I have the address in my bag." Sarah pulled out the crumpled letter Thomas had sent, written in his sprawling, careless handwriting. Mrs. Henderson's place. They asked directions from a shopkeeper and made their way through the crowded streets. Mrs. Henderson's boarding house was a 2-story structure that had seen better days, but it looked solid enough. Sarah knocked on the door, and after a moment, it was opened by a stout woman with gray hair and suspicious eyes. "Mrs. Henderson? I'm Sarah Mitchell. I'm looking for my brother, Thomas." The woman's expression shifted from suspicion to sympathy. "Oh, you poor dear. You came all this way. Come in, come in." She ushered them into a cramped parlor. "Your brother's upstairs, 3rd door on the right. But I must warn you, Miss Mitchell, he's not doing well. The doctor has been 3 times this week." Sarah's heart clenched with fear. "What do you mean not doing well? His letter said he broke his leg. The bone did not set properly and infection set in. He has been in and out of fever for days." Mrs. Henderson wrung her hands. "I have done what I can, but I am no nurse." Sarah did not wait to hear more. She rushed up the stairs, Caleb right behind her, and threw open the door to Thomas's room. Her brother lay in a narrow bed, his face pale and drawn, his hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. His right leg was splinted and wrapped in bandages that were stained with fluid. The smell of sickness hung heavy in the air. "Thomas!" Sarah dropped to her knees beside the bed, taking his hand. It was hot and dry, the fever burning through him. "Thomas, can you hear me? It is Sarah. I am here." Thomas's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. "Sarah? You should not be here. Too dangerous. I told you to stay in Denver." "As if I would listen to that. I am your sister. Where you go, I follow." She brushed the hair back from his forehead, fighting back tears. "We are going to get you well, you hear me? You're going to be fine." But even as she said it, she could see how sick he was. The infection had spread, and fever had taken deep hold. Without proper treatment, he might not survive. Caleb knelt beside her, his trained eyes assessing the situation. "May I look at his leg?" Sarah nodded, and Caleb carefully unwrapped the bandages. What he revealed made Sarah gasp. The skin around the break was red and swollen, with streaks of angry color spreading up Thomas's thigh. Fluid leaked from the wound, and the smell was putrid. "Blood poisoning," Caleb said grimly. "It is advanced. He needs a doctor immediately, someone who knows what they are doing." Mrs. Henderson said the doctor has been here 3 times. Then clearly the doctor is not helping. Caleb rewrapped the leg with gentle efficiency. "We need to get him somewhere clean, somewhere I can treat him properly. And we need to do it now, before the infection spreads further. Can we move him? Will it not make things worse?" "Leaving him here will definitely make things worse. At least if we take him, I have a chance to help." Caleb met her eyes. "Sarah, I cannot promise he will survive. The infection is serious, but I know more about treating wounds than most town doctors, and I have herbs and medicines back at my cabin that might help." "Then we take him to your cabin." Sarah made the decision without hesitation. "Whatever gives him the best chance." Caleb nodded and stood. "I will need to make a travois to pull him. It will be slow going, but it is the safest way to transport him. Can you stay with him while I arrange things?" "Of course." Caleb squeezed her shoulder, then left the room. Sarah heard him speaking with Mrs. Henderson downstairs, his deep voice calm and authoritative. Then his footsteps receded as he left the building. Sarah turned back to her brother, taking his hand in both of hers. "You're going to be all right, Thomas. Caleb is going to help you. He is good at healing. He saved my life when I showed up at his cabin with fever. He will save yours too." Thomas's eyes opened again, slightly more focused this time. "Who is Caleb?" A mountain man, a good man, someone I trust. Sarah smiled through her tears. Someone important to me. You fell in love. It was not a question. I did. Is that foolish? No. You deserve love, Sarah. You've taken care of me for so long, you deserve someone to take care of you for a change. Thomas coughed, wincing with pain. If he hurts you, I will kill him. He will not hurt me, and you are not killing anyone. You are going to focus on getting well. Thomas's grip on her hand tightened weakly. I'm sorry, Sarah. Sorry you had to come all this way. Sorry I have been such a burden. You are not a burden. You are my brother, and I love you. Nothing will change that. Sarah leaned down and kissed his forehead. Now rest. Save your strength. We have a journey ahead of us. Caleb returned an hour later, carrying poles and canvas he had purchased from a supply store. He quickly constructed a travois, the kind used for transporting injured people over rough terrain. Mrs. Henderson provided extra blankets and pillows, and between the three of them, they carefully moved Thomas from the bed to the travois. Thomas cried out in pain when they jostled his leg, and Sarah had to bite her lip to keep from crying. Caleb's face was set in grim lines, but his hands remained gentle, securing Thomas with ropes so he would not roll during transport. This is going to be rough, Caleb warned. The trip back to my cabin will take most of the night, and it will not be comfortable for him. We have no choice, Sarah said. We have to try. Then we go now, while we still have some daylight. They left Lidville as the sun was setting, Caleb pulling the travois with seemingly tireless strength while Sarah walked beside it, holding Thomas's hand and murmuring reassurances. The journey that had taken them a day and a half to complete on foot would take even longer with the travois, but Caleb set a steady pace, never faltering even as darkness fell. Sarah had brought a lantern, and its light bobbed and swayed as they made their way up the mountain. Thomas drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes mumbling incoherently, sometimes crying out in pain when the travois hit a rough patch. Each sound drove a knife through Sarah's heart, but she kept moving, kept encouraging him, kept praying. Caleb proved his strength and endurance over those long hours. He pulled the travois without complaint, navigating the treacherous mountain trails in near darkness with the confidence of someone who knew every rock and route. When they came to a steep section, he lifted the travois and carried it bodily, Thomas and all, rather than risk the jarring of dragging it. They stopped once to rest, and Sarah gave Thomas water and willow bark tea that Caleb had brewed. Thomas could barely swallow, but they got some of it down him. We are halfway there, Caleb said quietly. How are you holding up? I'm fine. Do not worry about me. I always worry about you. He cupped her face in his hand, his thumb stroking her cheek. You're being so strong, Sarah. Your brother is lucky to have you. I just want him to survive. He will. I will do everything in my power to make sure of it. Sarah turned her head and kissed his palm. I believe you. They pressed on through the night, and it was well past midnight when they finally reached Caleb's cabin. He pulled the travois right up to the door and then carefully carried Thomas inside, laying him on the bed where Sarah had recovered from her own fever just days before. Thomas was barely conscious now, his breathing shallow and rapid. Caleb immediately went to work, building up the fire and setting water to boil. He gathered jars and bottles from his shelves, mixing tinctures and poultices with practiced efficiency. What can I do? Sarah asked, desperate to help. Cut away the bandages on his leg, all of them. I need to see what we are dealing with. Caleb handed her a knife, and Sarah set to work, carefully cutting through the layers of cloth. When the wound was finally exposed, she had to turn away, fighting nausea. The flesh around the break was angry and inflamed, and she could see the bone through the wound. Pus and fluid oozed from multiple points, and the smell was overwhelming. Caleb examined the leg with clinical detachment. The bone is not set properly, as I suspected, and the infection has established itself deep in the tissue. I'm going to have to clean this thoroughly, re-break the bone to set it correctly, and then apply medicines to fight the infection. It is going to be extremely painful for him, even with laudanum. Do whatever you have to do, just save him. Caleb nodded and began preparing. He had Sarah hold Thomas's shoulders while he carefully straightened the leg. Thomas screamed, a sound that would haunt Sarah's nightmares, but Caleb worked quickly, realigning the broken bone with sure hands. Then he splinted it properly, using techniques Sarah had never seen before. Next came the cleaning. Caleb used boiled water and strong alcohol to flush the wound, his movements thorough and methodical. More of the foul-smelling pus came out, and Sarah had to swallow hard against the bile rising in her throat. "Good," Caleb murmured. "We are getting the infection out. That is what we need." He packed the wound with a paste made from herbs Sarah did not recognize, then wrapped the leg in clean bandages. Finally, he mixed another tincture and coaxed Thomas to drink it. "What is that?" Sarah asked. "Echinacea, golden seal, and garlic, among other things. It will help his body fight the infection from the inside." Caleb wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving a smear of blood. "Now we wait. The next 24 hours will tell us whether he will pull through." Sarah looked at her brother's pale face, his labored breathing. "What are his chances?" "Better than they were, but still not good. 50-50 maybe. It depends on how strong he is, how much fight he has left." Caleb put his hand on her shoulder. "But I have seen men survive worse. Do not give up hope." Sarah nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. Caleb pulled her into his arms, and she finally let herself cry, all the fear and exhaustion and worry pouring out in great racking sobs. "I cannot lose him," she gasped. "He is all the family I have left." "You will not lose him. I will not let that happen." Caleb held her tighter. "We will fight for him together, just like we are fighting for us, and we will win." Sarah clung to those words, letting them be her anchor as the storm of emotion passed. When she finally pulled back, wiping her eyes, she saw that dawn was breaking, pale light filtering through the cabin window. "Thank you," she said, "for everything, for helping him, for being here, for not giving up. I told you before, Sarah, you are worth fighting for, and so is your brother, because he matters to you." Caleb kissed her forehead. "Now you need to rest. You are exhausted. I should stay with Thomas." "I will stay with Thomas. You need to sleep or you will be no good to anyone." He guided her to his chair by the fire and wrapped her in blankets. "Just a few hours. I will wake you if anything changes." Too tired to argue, Sarah curled up in the chair and let her eyes close. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Caleb sitting beside Thomas's bed, his large hand resting gently on her brother's shoulder, keeping vigil. Sarah woke to find sunlight streaming through the window and Caleb moving quietly around the cabin. She sat up, momentarily disoriented, then remembered where she was and why. "Thomas," she asked urgently, "still alive. The fever is high, but no higher than it was. I have been changing his bandages and getting fluids into him." Caleb brought her a cup of coffee. "Drink this. You need it." Sarah accepted the coffee gratefully, letting the warmth seep into her hands. "Did you sleep at all?" "A little. Enough." Caleb looked tired, lines of exhaustion etched deep around his eyes, but his gaze was steady. "I'm more concerned about you right now. When did you last eat a proper meal?" Sarah tried to remember and could not. "Yesterday morning, I think." "That is what I thought." Caleb ladled stew into a bowl and handed it to her. "Eat. All of it. You cannot take care of your brother if you collapse from hunger." Sarah ate mechanically, not tasting the food, but knowing Caleb was right. She needed to keep her strength up. When the bowl was empty, she stood and moved to Thomas's bedside. Her brother looked slightly better in the daylight. His color was still poor, but his breathing seemed easier. She touched his forehead and found it hot but not burning. "Is that a good sign?" she asked. "It means he is holding steady. Whether that translates to improvement remains to be seen." Caleb checked Thomas's pulse, counting beats against his pocket watch. "Strong enough. He's a fighter." "He always has been. When we were children, he would get into the worst scrapes, climbing trees that were too tall, jumping from heights he should not have. He broke his arm twice before he was 10. Mother used to say he was going to give her gray hair before her time." Caleb smiled faintly. "Sounds like he has not changed much." "No, he's still looking for the next adventure, still convinced he's invincible." Sarah took Thomas's hand. "I hope he lives long enough to learn he's not." Over the next 3 days, Sarah and Caleb fell into a routine. They took turns sitting with Thomas, monitoring his fever, changing his bandages, coaxing fluids and medicine into him. Caleb checked the wound multiple times a day, cleaning it and applying fresh poultices. The infection was stubborn, but slowly, gradually, it began to recede. The angry red streaks faded, the swelling decreased, and the wound began to look less frightening. Thomas himself remained mostly unconscious, his body focused entirely on the work of healing. He would sometimes wake enough to drink or mumble a few words, but then he would drift away again, lost in fever dreams. Sarah found the waiting almost unbearable. She wanted action, wanted to do something to speed her brother's recovery. But Caleb was patient, reminding her that healing took time, that the body could not be rushed. In the quiet hours, usually late at night when Thomas was sleeping peacefully and the crisis seemed to have passed, Sarah and Caleb would sit together by the fire, talking in low voices. "I have been thinking," Caleb said one night, "about what happens after Thomas recovers." "What have you been thinking?" "That I do not want to lose you. These past days, working alongside you to save your brother, it has shown me what life could be like if I let someone in, if I stopped hiding in the mountains and actually lived." He took her hand. "I want to try, Sarah. I want to see if we can make this work." Sarah's heart swelled. "I want that too, more than anything. But I need to be honest with you. I do not think I can live in a town. Too many people, too much noise. It makes me feel like I'm going to crawl out of my skin. Then we do not live in a town. We live here, in the mountains, or we find somewhere else remote and wild. I do not care where we are, as long as we are together." Caleb looked at her searchingly. "You would give up civilization for me? A woman who grew up in St. Louis, who knows cities and culture? I would give up anything for you, because what I have discovered these past weeks is that home is not a place, it is a person. You are my home now, Caleb. Wherever you are is where I want to be." Caleb pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I love you, Sarah Mitchell. I think I have loved you since the moment you collapsed on my porch in the rain." "I love you too," Sarah whispered against his chest. "So much it scares me sometimes." "Then we will be scared together." He pulled back enough to kiss her, deep and slow and full of promise. "When Thomas is well enough, I am going to marry you, if you will have me." Sarah laughed, joy bubbling up through the fear and exhaustion. Yes, I will marry you. Nothing would make me happier." They sealed the promise with another kiss, and for the first time since arriving at the cabin with Thomas, Sarah felt hope blossom fully in her chest. They would get through this. Thomas would recover, and she and Caleb would build a life together. It would be unconventional and challenging, but it would be theirs. On the morning of the fourth day, Thomas woke fully for the first time. His eyes were clear, his fever finally broken. Sarah was at his side immediately. "Welcome back," she said, squeezing his hand. Thomas looked around the cabin, taking in his surroundings with obvious confusion. "Where am I?" "Caleb's cabin. He's been treating your leg. How do you feel?" "Like I got kicked by a mule." Thomas tried to sit up and gasped in pain. "What happened? I remember being in my room at Mrs. Henderson's and then everything gets fuzzy." "You had blood poisoning from your broken leg. The infection was bad. Caleb brought you here and cleaned the wound properly. He has been taking care of you for 4 days. Thomas's gaze shifted to where Caleb stood by the fireplace. "You are the mountain man Sarah mentioned." "I am. Caleb Stone." Caleb approached the bed, and Sarah saw her brother's eyes widen at the man's size. "You saved my life." "I helped. Your sister did most of the work. She barely left your side." Thomas looked back at Sarah, and she saw his eyes grow wet. "You crossed 100 miles of wilderness to find me. Then you carried me to a cabin in the mountains. You are insane, you know that?" "I know, but you are my brother. What else was I supposed to do? Let me die like an idiot who got himself hurt mining for silver? Never." Sarah leaned down and hugged him carefully, mindful of his injuries. "You're stuck with me, Thomas Mitchell, for better or worse." "Apparently for worse," Thomas said, but he was smiling. He looked past her to Caleb again. "So you are the man my sister fell in love with." Caleb's expression softened. "I am. And she is the woman I fell in love with. I hope that does not cause a problem." "The only problem is that you are terrifying and could probably snap me in half with your bare hands. Other than that, I am delighted. Sarah deserves someone who will take care of her for once." Thomas winced and shifted, trying to find a more comfortable position. Though I have to ask, what are your intentions toward my sister?" "Thomas?" Sarah felt her face heat, but Caleb answered seriously. I intend to marry her with your blessing. I intend to spend the rest of my life making her happy, and I intend to build a home where she feels safe and loved and valued." Thomas studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. That is what I was hoping you would say. You have my blessing for what it is worth." "It is worth a great deal," Caleb said. "Family matters. Even family that is foolish enough to break his leg in a mining accident? Especially then." Thomas laughed, then groaned and clutched his side. "Do not make me laugh. Everything hurts." "That's what happens when you almost die from infection," Sarah said, but her tone was gentle. "You need to rest, build your strength. It will be weeks before you can walk again." "Weeks? I cannot stay here for weeks. I will be an imposition." "You will stay here as long as necessary," Caleb said firmly. "I have plenty of supplies, and there is room. Besides, I cannot send your sister away now. That means you stay too." "I will help with chores, earn my keep," Thomas offered. "We will figure it out. For now, just focus on healing." Caleb checked the bandages on Thomas's leg, his touch professional and careful. "The wound is looking much better. Another week and I think we can remove the stitches." "You stitched me up?" "The wound was deep. It needed stitches to heal properly." Thomas looked at Sarah with raised eyebrows. "You found yourself a handy man to have around." "I did indeed," Sarah agreed, smiling at Caleb. Thomas stayed awake for another hour, eating the broth Sarah fed him and asking questions about the cabin and the mountains. But exhaustion eventually claimed him, and he drifted back to sleep. Sarah stepped outside onto the porch, breathing in the crisp mountain air. Caleb joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on top of her head. "He is going to be all right," Caleb said. "He has turned the corner." "Thanks to you." "Thanks to both of us. You never gave up on him." They stood like that for a long while, watching the sun move across the sky and listening to the sounds of the forest. Sarah felt a peace settle over her that she had not experienced in years. Her brother was healing. She had found love in the most unexpected place, and ahead of her lay a future full of possibility. "When should we get married?" she asked. "As soon as Thomas can stand to witness it. I want him there, and I want to do this properly." Caleb turned her in his arms, looking down at her with those intense blue eyes. "I want you to have the wedding you deserve, even if it is just a simple ceremony in front of a preacher. I do not need anything fancy. I just need you. You have me. Forever, if you want me." Forever sounds perfect. Caleb kissed her then, slow and sweet and full of love, and Sarah knew that she had found exactly what she had been searching for without even knowing it, not just a home, but a partner. Not just safety, but adventure. Not just survival, but a life worth living. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Sarah's life. Thomas healed steadily under Caleb's care, progressing from bedridden to sitting up to finally taking his first careful steps with a crutch Caleb carved for him. The infection had cleared completely, and the bone was setting properly. Within a month, Thomas was able to walk short distances without assistance, though he would always have a slight limp. During those weeks, Sarah learned what it meant to live in the mountains. Caleb taught her to identify edible plants and medicinal herbs. He showed her how to track animals and read the signs of changing weather. He took her fishing in the streams and hunting for rabbits. She learned to split wood and maintain the fire. She learned to tan hides and smoke meat. Skills she never thought she would need became second nature. In turn, Sarah brought her own skills to the cabin. She sewed clothes for all three of them, using fabric and supplies Caleb purchased on a trip to Leadville. She organized the cabin, creating a more comfortable and welcoming space. She cooked meals that went beyond simple survival, using spices and techniques to make even basic ingredients sing. She taught Thomas and Caleb songs from her childhood, filling the cabin with music and laughter. Thomas proved to be an easy guest, despite his initial worries. He was grateful for the care he had received and eager to contribute however he could. As his strength returned, he helped with chores, carving and mending and organizing. He and Caleb developed an easy friendship, bonding over shared experiences of war and loss. Thomas had been too young to fight, but he had lived through the aftermath, and that gave them common ground. 6 weeks after Thomas's arrival at the cabin, Caleb declared him well enough to travel. "The bone has healed solid. You should be fine to make the trip to Leadville for the wedding." Wedding? Thomas looked between them with mock surprise. Are you two finally making it official? We are, Sarah said, unable to keep the smile off her face. Tomorrow, if we can find a preacher. Tomorrow it is then. Caleb pulled Sarah close, kissing her temple. I have waited long enough to make you my wife. They rode to Leadville the next morning, Caleb and Sarah on his horse, and Thomas on a mount Caleb had purchased for the occasion. The journey that had been so desperate and frightening weeks before was now filled with anticipation and joy. In Leadville, they found a circuit preacher who agreed to perform the ceremony. There was no time for a fancy dress or elaborate preparations, but Sarah did not care. She wore a simple dress she had sewn herself, her hair braided and woven with wildflowers Caleb had picked that morning. They stood in the small church with Thomas as their witness, and Sarah felt tears stream down her face as Caleb spoke his vows in that deep rumbling voice that had become the sound of home to her. I promise to love you and protect you for all the days of my life, Caleb said, holding both her hands in his massive ones. I promise to build a home where you feel safe and valued. I promise to stand beside you through whatever storms come, to be your shelter and your strength. I promise to love you not in spite of who you are, but because of it. You are the light that brought me back from darkness, and I will spend the rest of my life being grateful that you stumbled onto my porch in the rain. Sarah's vows were equally heartfelt. I promise to love you with all that I am. I promise to stand with you, not behind you. I promise to build a life with you in the wild places, to find joy in simplicity and meaning in each day. I promise to see you, the real you, not the man you fear you might be, but the man you actually are, kind and brave and good. You saved my life in more ways than one, and I will spend mine showing you that you were worth saving too. The preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and when Caleb kissed her, Sarah felt like her heart would burst with happiness. Thomas cheered, causing several heads to turn, and then he was hugging them both, laughing and crying at the same time. I am so happy for you, he said. Both of you. You found each other against all odds. We did, Caleb agreed, keeping one arm firmly around Sarah's waist. And I intend to make sure she never regrets it. They celebrated with dinner at the best restaurant Leadville had to offer, which was not particularly fancy but felt luxurious compared to their usual fare. Thomas regaled them with stories from his mining days, carefully avoiding the accident that had nearly killed him. Caleb was quiet, but content, his hand never far from Sarah's, touching her shoulder or her hand or her hair, as if reassuring himself that she was real. As the sun set, they began the journey back to the cabin, now truly a family. Sarah rode in front of Caleb, his arms around her, and she leaned back against his chest with perfect contentment. Happy, Mrs. Stone? Caleb murmured in her ear. Happier than I knew it was possible to be, Sarah replied. How did I get so lucky? I could ask the same question. A beautiful, brave, extraordinary woman showed up with a fever and a prayer and somehow decided I was worth loving. That is a miracle if I have ever seen one. You were worth loving before I ever arrived. You just needed someone to show you. They reached the cabin as full dark settled over the mountains. Thomas excused himself almost immediately, claiming exhaustion, though Sarah suspected he was giving them privacy on their wedding night. He settled into the small loft area Caleb had built for him, leaving the main room to the newlyweds. Caleb built up the fire until the cabin glowed with warmth and light. Then he turned to Sarah, suddenly looking uncertain. I've never done this before, he admitted. Been with a woman, I mean. Been intimate. The war came when I was young, and after that, I isolated myself. So if I do this wrong... Sarah stepped close and placed her fingers over his lips. You could never do this wrong. We will figure it out together. She reached up and began unbuttoning his shirt, her fingers steady despite the flutter of nerves in her stomach. Caleb stood perfectly still, letting her undress him, his eyes dark and intense as they followed her every movement. When she pushed the shirt off his shoulders, she caught her breath at the sight of him. His body was a landscape of muscle and scars, powerful and beautiful in its own rough way. Sarah traced one particularly long scar that ran across his ribs. From the war. Bayonet. I was lucky it was not deeper. She leaned forward and pressed a kiss to the scar. Every mark tells a story of survival. You are here, alive, And that is what matters. Caleb's hands came up to frame her face, and he kissed her with a hunger that made her knees weak. "My turn," he murmured against her lips. He undressed her slowly, his large hands surprisingly deft with buttons and laces. Each piece of clothing that fell away was met with kisses and whispered words of appreciation. By the time Sarah stood before him, in nothing but her skin, she felt worshipped rather than exposed. Caleb picked her up as easily as if she weighed nothing and carried her to the bed. What followed was tentative and sweet and occasionally awkward, but always filled with love. They learned each other's bodies, discovered what brought pleasure and what brought gasps of delight. They laughed at fumbles and sighed at successes. And when they finally came together fully, Sarah felt complete in a way she never had before. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the furs, Caleb's fingers tracing lazy patterns on her back. "That was worth waiting for," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Sarah propped herself up on his chest, looking down at him. "I love you, Caleb Stone, more than words can express. And I love you, Sarah Stone, my wife." The answer to a prayer I did not even know I was making. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, the fire crackling softly and the mountain standing guard outside their door. The years that followed were full and rich, though not without challenges. Thomas stayed with them through the winter, recovering fully from his injuries. When spring came, he announced his intention to return to civilization, but not to mining. "I think I've had enough of nearly dying in collapsed tunnels," he said with a wry smile. "I'm thinking of Denver, maybe opening a business, something stable and safe." "That sounds wise," Sarah said, hugging her brother. "But you will visit?" "As often as you will have me, though I suspect you two lovebirds will be too busy to notice if I am around." He was right in a way. Sarah and Caleb were absorbed in building their life together. They expanded the cabin, adding a second room and a proper kitchen. They built a shed for storing supplies and a lean-to for the horses. They planted a small garden that Sarah tended lovingly, growing vegetables to supplement their diet. Caleb continued his trapping, but now Sarah often accompanied him, learning the trails and the habits of the animals. They made the trip to Leadville twice a year to sell furs and purchase supplies, but they never stayed longer than necessary. The town felt loud and crowded, and they were always eager to return to the quiet of the mountains. In the second year of their marriage, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and not a small amount of fear. Childbirth was dangerous under the best circumstances, and they were miles from any doctor. But Caleb approached the challenge the way he approached everything, with careful preparation and determination. He studied every book on midwifery he could find. He consulted with an older woman in Leadville who had delivered dozens of babies. He stocked the cabin with supplies and medicines, preparing for every possible complication. When Sarah's time came in late fall, it was Caleb's hands that brought their son into the world. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Sarah thought she might not survive. But Caleb was there, steady and strong, coaching her through each contraction, never showing the fear she knew he must be feeling. Finally, as dawn broke over the mountains, their son was born, red-faced and squalling with impressive lung power. Caleb cut the cord and cleaned the baby with shaking hands, then placed him in Sarah's arms. "A boy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We have a son." Sarah looked down at the tiny face, counting fingers and toes, marveling at the perfection of him. "What should we name him?" "What about Samuel, after my father?" "Samuel Stone. I like it." Sarah kissed her son's forehead. "Welcome to the world, Samuel. We are so glad you are here." Caleb wrapped his arms around both of them, his family, and Sarah saw tears streaming down his face into his beard. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for giving me this, for giving me a reason to live instead of just survive." Samuel proved to be a healthy, happy baby who thrived in the mountain air. As he grew, he showed signs of inheriting his father's size and strength, but also his mother's quick mind and compassionate heart. The cabin rang with his laughter and occasionally his cries, but it was a joyful noise, the sound of life and hope. Thomas visited regularly, making the trip from Denver several times a year. He had indeed opened a business, a general store that was doing well. He never married, claiming that no woman could compare to the one his sister had found, but he seemed content with his life. He doted on his nephew, bringing gifts and spoiling Samuel outrageously. 3 years after Samuel's birth, Sarah gave birth to a daughter they named Grace, after the doe that still visited the clearing regularly. Grace had her father's blue eyes and her mother's delicate features, and she was fierce from birth, refusing to be intimidated by anything, including her much larger older brother. The cabin expanded again to accommodate the growing family. Caleb built a loft for the children and a larger porch where they could sit on summer evenings and watch the sun set. Sarah sewed clothes and quilts, creating a warm, welcoming home filled with color and comfort. Life was not always easy. Winters were harsh, and there were times when illness or injury threatened, but they faced every challenge together, their love deepening with each passing year. Caleb never fully lost his scars from the war, the nightmares that occasionally woke him in the dark hours of the night, but Sarah was always there to hold him, to remind him that he was a good man who was deeply loved. Sarah sometimes missed the conveniences of city life, the shops and theaters and constant activity. But she never regretted her choice. The mountains had given her something far more valuable, a true home, a loving husband, and a family that filled her days with purpose and joy. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching Samuel and Grace play in the clearing, Caleb took Sarah's hand. "Do you ever wish things had turned out differently?" he asked. "That you had not gotten sick, that you had not stumbled onto my porch that night?" Sarah turned to look at him, this man who had saved her life in every way that mattered. His hair was starting to show threads of gray now, and his beard was more grizzled than before. The lines around his eyes had deepened, carved by years of smiles and laughter. He was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "Not for a single moment," she said. "You are my greatest adventure, Caleb Stone. You and this life we built together. Even though it is hard sometimes, even though we are isolated and you have to work so hard, especially because of those things, easy does not mean good. We have something real here, something precious. We have each other, and we have our children, and we have this mountain that has become our sanctuary. What more could I possibly want?" Caleb pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I love you, Sarah, more now than even on the day we married, and I did not think that was possible. I love you too, more than all the mountains and all the sky and all the stars." They sat like that as the sun painted the peaks gold and then pink and finally purple, their children's laughter ringing through the clearing, the smell of pine thick on the air. It was a perfect moment, but then, Sarah reflected, her life was full of perfect moments now. All because one stormy night, sick and desperate, she had seen a light through the trees and followed it to the door of a lonely mountain man. She had shown up with a fever and a prayer. Caleb had answered both before the night was through, and in doing so, he had given her everything she had ever needed: love, home, family, purpose, and she had given him the same, pulling him back from isolation, showing him that he was worthy of love and capable of giving it in return. They had saved each other, really, and that was the greatest miracle of all. As the years continued to pass, Sarah and Caleb watched their children grow. Samuel became tall and strong like his father, with the same quiet confidence and gentle strength. At 16, he could outwork most grown men, but he never used his size to intimidate. Instead, he used it to protect and help, whether that meant hauling water for his mother or rescuing injured animals he found in the forest. Grace proved to be as fierce as her name suggested she should be gentle. At 13, she could track a deer as well as her father and shoot a rifle with impressive accuracy. She also had a gift for healing, inheriting both her father's knowledge of herbs and her mother's compassionate touch. Animals seemed to trust her instinctively, and Sarah often found her daughter tending to an injured bird or a rabbit with a broken leg. Thomas had married finally, at the age of 43, to a widow named Eleanor who ran a boarding house in Denver. They had no children of their own, but Eleanor had 3 from her first marriage, and Thomas embraced his role as stepfather with enthusiasm. He still visited the mountain regularly, now bringing his entire family, and the cabin would ring with activity and noise during those visits. Caleb had changed too, in subtle but important ways. The nightmares came less frequently now, and when they did, they were less intense. He had learned to forgive himself, though Sarah suspected it was a process that would last his whole life. He was more comfortable around people than he had been, able to make the trips to Leadville without the tense anxiety that had once gripped him. He would never be a social man, but he had learned that occasional human contact was not the burden he had once believed it to be. Sarah had found a new creative outlet in quilting, creating beautiful patterns from scraps of fabric and turning them into blankets that were both functional and artistic. Her work became known throughout the region, and people would sometimes make the journey to the cabin specifically to commission a quilt from her. It gave her a sense of purpose beyond motherhood and household management, a way to express herself and contribute to the family's income. On the evening of Sarah's 40th birthday, the family gathered for a special dinner. Samuel had hunted a turkey, and Grace had baked a cake using precious sugar and flour. Thomas and Eleanor had made the trip from Denver, bringing gifts and gossip from the city. After dinner, when the children were cleaning up and Thomas and Eleanor were settling into their sleeping area, Caleb took Sarah's hand and led her outside onto the porch. The night was clear and cold, with stars scattered across the sky in glittering profusion. Caleb wrapped a blanket around Sarah's shoulders and pulled her close. "I have something for you," he said. "Caleb, you did not have to get me anything. Having everyone here is gift enough." Nevertheless, he pulled a small wooden box from his pocket and handed it to her. Sarah opened it and gasped. Inside was a necklace, a simple silver chain with a pendant carved from a dark stone. But the carving was exquisite, a perfect miniature cabin surrounded by pine trees, with a tiny heart carved into the door. "Caleb, this is beautiful. Did you make this?" "I've been working on it for months. I wanted to give you something that represented our life together, our home, carved from the mountain itself." He took the necklace and fastened it around her neck. "You are my home, Sarah. You always have been." Sarah touched the pendant, feeling the smooth stone warm under her fingers. "And you are mine. After all these years, you are still the most important person in my world. Even more than the children. Different from the children, they are a part of us, a beautiful expression of our love. But you are my foundation, my partner, the person I choose every single day." Caleb kissed her, soft and sweet. "I choose you too. Every day for the rest of my life." They stood together under the stars, wrapped in blankets in each other, and Sarah marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From a desperate, feverish woman stumbling through a storm to this, a happy, fulfilled woman surrounded by love and family. Life in the mountains was hard, but it was also honest and pure. Every joy was earned, every comfort appreciated. Nothing was taken for granted. Inside the cabin, she could hear Samuel telling a story, his deep voice so like his father's. Grace laughed at something, bright and musical. Thomas and Eleanor were discussing their plans for expanding the store, the sounds of family, of home, of life fully lived. "Thank you," Sarah said softly. "For what?" "For opening your door that night, for taking me in when you could have turned me away, for loving me when I needed it most, for building this life with me. Sarah, you are the one who changed everything. You walked into my isolation and filled it with light. I should be thanking you. Then let us just agree to be grateful for each other." "I can agree to that." Caleb tightened his arms around her. "Every single day I am grateful for you." They returned inside eventually, drawn by the warmth of the fire and the laughter of their family. Sarah took her place at the center of the table, Caleb beside her, their children and extended family gathered close. Looking around at the faces she loved, at the home they had built together, she felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. This was what she had prayed for that desperate night in the storm, though she had not known it then. Not just survival, but a reason to survive. Not just shelter, but a home. Not just help, but love. The mountain man had answered both her fever and her prayer before that long-ago night was through. And in the years since, he had continued answering them day after day with his steady presence and unwavering love. As the evening wore on and the fire burned low, Sarah found herself watching Caleb as he carved a new toy for Grace, his large hands moving with practiced skill. He looked up and caught her gaze, and the smile he gave her was soft and intimate, just for her. 22 years had passed since that stormy October night in 1878, 22 years of joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge, growth and change, 22 years of love. and Sarah would not trade a single moment of it for anything in the world. The mountain stood eternal outside their door, silent and strong, bearing witness to the life they had built in its shadow. Inside the cabin, warmth and love and laughter filled every corner. This was home. This was family. This was love that had been forged in crisis and tempered by time, emerging stronger and more precious with each passing year. Sarah Stone, once Sarah Mitchell of St. Louis, leaned against her husband's shoulder and smiled. She had found her place in the world, not despite the hardship, but because of it, and she would spend the rest of her days grateful for the fever and the prayer that had led her here, to this man, to this life, to this perfect, imperfect happiness. The story that had begun with desperation and illness had become a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of compassion, the resilience of the human spirit, and the transformative nature of love. And it would continue, generation after generation, as Samuel and Grace passed the stories on to their own children, ensuring that the tale of the woman who showed up with a fever and a prayer, and the mountain man who answered both, would live on forever in the annals of family history. A legacy of love carved into the mountains themselves, as permanent and enduring as the stone beneath their feet.